Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
2025 through Parks and Rec. We count nearly 100 partnerships of varying degrees to deliver a myriad of programs and services that otherwise really wouldn't be possible had we not have these partnerships. You'll likely recognize the ones that you see on this screen with the Arboretum, Great Bear, Levitt, the Visitor Center, Great Plains Zoo. Those are the big ones, but some that you may not be so familiar with include partners like pickleball, lacrosse, rugby, Falls Area Single Track, in addition to the more familiar sports agencies like SEBA, Dakota Alliance, South Dakota Junior Football, and those larger recreation program providers. We certainly value and treasure these partnerships because, again, without these partnerships, our park system certainly wouldn't be as diverse, certainly wouldn't be as comprehensive, and I know certainly wouldn't be as valued. In 2022, our budget includes a sizable investment in the McKinnon Park band shell in our repair and maintenance budget to renovate that band shell. The cost to renovate the band shell is estimated to be at $610,000. We're also recognizing half of that as revenue in our budget, whereby the McKinnon Park neighborhood would provide matching funds for that project to fully fund the project both between the city and the neighborhood association. So we're excited about being able to get that done. And then as we grow in population, you know, we also need to grow our number of parks that we've got out there to serve our community. In our 5-year plan, we have three new build outs of our neighborhood parks that you'll see in the 3 red pins that are on our east side of our city. They include Majestic Meadows Park, adjacent to Inspiration Elementary, Willow Ridge Park, adjacent to Fred Assam Elementary, and Whispering Woods South Park, adjacent to Horizon Elementary, which is near 68th and Bonson. We also have a new neighborhood park called Wild Meadows Park at 6th and Dubuque that will be ready for development in the coming years. And then also on the west side, if you track these yellow pins that we have on the map, we'll develop the parkland adjacent to McGovern Middle School, as well as a potential school site on the far west side of Sioux Falls. I would note that most of these new parks are on the edge of or on the outside of our growth boundary maps to accommodate that growth. So obviously the growth boundary is shown there in gray. Some of them that we're currently doing are inside that growth boundary or on the edge, and others are yet, we're getting beyond that so that we can be in front of the growth. A couple of other community-based projects that we have in our 2022 budget include Rotary Park and Tut Hill Park. If you remember, we used to have an entrance just past Southeastern to get into Rotary Park before the 26th Street Bridge was constructed. Following the construction, we relocated the park to the west side of the river, and it left some open space and green space where the parking lot used to be. And so we thought it'd be a great opportunity to install our first fitness court in Rotary Park, and we're excited about that. Here's an example of what one of those might look like. Obviously, it would allow our residents to obviously stay healthy and fit, and we're excited about that because it'll be the first one of its kind in our park system. And then the other one I wanted to highlight was the Tut Hill Park improvements. Those buildings that we have at Tut Hill Park are pretty old. I think Councilor Kiley at one time also said he might have had some experience with some of the buildings up in that park. But anyway, as a seasonal employee, that is. And so really would like to, yeah, sorry about that. Not trying to date you or anything. But we will be replacing the restroom and the shop building there and just combining those into one as part of the renovations there. The other thing that'll do, it will provide ADA compliance, adequate storage for equipment and materials, and then it will also remove the overhead power line that we always try to do that in city parks just from a safety standpoint. So those are a couple highlights on a couple community projects, community park projects. All right, so investing today for a better tomorrow. As Sean mentioned in your presentations from last week, we do have a good plan to address our aging pools. And while they've served our community well for generations, we do need to have a plan to be able to address their replacement over the next several years through the Quality of Life Bond 3 that Sean had indicated. Our first aquatic facility master plan was completed in 2013, And at that time, it called for needing a plan to replace those aging facilities. So I'm pleased that we now have that plan and presented that plan to you, and certainly hope that it'll meet with your support. Pool replacements in general, looking back, first started with our replacement of Drake Springs back in 2009. Followed up that with the replacement of Spelleberg in 2016. McKinnon Park, Frank Olson, and Keene are the oldest and last of the traditional, or what I call tank-type pools in our aquatics inventory. And we also plan to make some enhancements to Terrace and Laurel Oak. Not large investments, just things to try to advance their usefulness to us over the next 20 to 30 years. And just there's some sand play areas that probably need some renovation and minor modifications to some of the existing systems there. We do have funding in 2023 to begin master planning these parks, just like we did with Nelson Park for Drake Springs and like we did for Spelleberg for the Midco Aquatic Center. These pool replacement projects will affect the surrounding amenities. It's very unlikely that these pools will go back into the same exact locations, and as a result, we need to plan the entirety of the park so that when the project is all done, everything fits and flows together. So once these master plans are completed, we'll not only have a good pool design, but a park design and a cost estimate that will assist with the sizing of the bond. Well, thinking back to 2019, I don't know if you guys all saw it, but I did, the black cloud of smoke that hovered over Elmwood Park for a while, and when the cart barn caught on fire. So since that time, we have some temporary measures put in place to be able to store the carts, but we've been working with Justin and the Landscapes Management team, who manage our golf courses for us, to discuss what a new facility should provide for at Elmwood. The real primary shortcoming with Elmwood is it's simply too small. It's about a third of the size of what we'd like to see it to be able to accommodate the number of golf outings. They've been doing a lot of 27-hole events, which really create large numbers for banquets and receptions. But also, they've been doing a lot of graduations and tailgaters and things like that at the clubhouses, above and beyond just golf-related events. And so they've really thought outside of the box about how they can maximize the public use of those buildings. And so the additional space and upgraded experience at the new clubhouse and cart storage facilities will really allow us to grow rounds and revenues and have more events. And Justin's probably one of his biggest frustrations is having to turn events away because they don't have enough space to accommodate it, or the quality of the space that many of these golf outings would like to see. So we look forward to being able to start that design in 2023 as well, and see the start of that replacement facility underway by 2024. And it wouldn't be a budget presentation without talking about EAB. I know we were here earlier this year, but I'm here to tell you that EAB is real. We're seeing it more and more out in the community. We're in year three of a 10-year EAB management plan, and the 2022 budget continues to invest in that plan. We're meeting or exceeding our removals of 2,200 a year. Again, we can't get complacent on this plan. It's one of the things we talked about when we first rolled out the plan, is that a tendency is like, well, we don't see it, trees aren't falling over, really don't see it throughout the community, so we can just relax and not really keep up the pace. Well, we're seeing it, and we do need to keep up the pace because we still have 7 years left in the plan. And so just if you are talking to homeowners or property owners out there and they have trees on their private property, they need to be planning for how they're going to address those, because the council stepped up in a big way, providing funds for us to be able to remove the trees along the streets, but it doesn't address their private ash trees. So just a word of warning, you know, not a panic, but just have a plan for how you're going to address your private trees. And then finally, just know that, again, we're seeing it. I don't know if you saw John Ball's story on the news the other night, but it is progressing. We are seeing it in certain areas of the city. We continue to find more and more of it. And again, we just have to stick to the plan. So to close, I would just tell you that I think we're really well positioned for taking care of what we have today, and also at the same time scaling for future growth of the park system. Maintenance and improvement of the existing parks, trails, and pools will continue to be a priority. You know, finance, they've done a good job of understanding our pain points, understanding where we have challenges keeping up with repair and maintenance, and so they bolster our budget in many areas, especially repair and maintenance. Our cyclic programs that we do through our CIP, our park roads, our parking lots, our playgrounds, our play courts, our internal park trails, our rec trail, the lighting improvements across the park system. Feel like we're in really good shape there. EAB, we talked about, continue with that plan. And with your support, we will have a solid plan for addressing our aging pools as well as the clubhouse at Elmwood with the Quality of Life Bond 3. And then at the same time, adding parks and trails and open space to continue to serve our growing and changing community. As you saw between Bill and Sean's presentation, and I'm sure with Jeff's later, we're continuing to grow. And to be able to support that growth, we need to be able to provide the open space that the community enjoys. So we're here to answer questions if you have them, and thank you for your time.
Councilors, questions? Councilor Neitzer?
Thanks for the presentation. With the exception of perhaps Public Works, this is one of the most biggest and diverse departments. I could go in a lot of directions. So maybe first, there was, I don't remember where I saw it, but there was, I think, a program that was planned to potentially incentivize people to replace trees in the boulevard. Can you speak to that, and would that be limited to just people who lost trees, or would that be anybody?
Yeah, so we're actually just on the cusp of launching those letters that will go out to those folks that lost ash trees to the EAB. And so one of the things that we're doing is incentivize them with a $50 voucher that they can take to participating nurseries to replace their trees with an approved street tree, subject to having an approved planting permit. So if you request a voucher and you would like to plant a tree, we'll go out and inspect the site, just make sure that it meets the requirements. It's not too close to an intersection. It's not blocking a stop sign. It's not too close to your driveway, all those parameters we have. And subject to getting an approved street tree planting permit, you can take that voucher in and get a discount off your tree that way. So, but it is for only those folks that have lost trees at this point.
Okay. In Rotary Park, in that area during the construction, there were these, I guess, maybe fiberglass kayak launches. We've talked about those before. Recently, when I was riding through there, I saw that a few were sitting up in the grass. And I did hear positive feedback that people really like them. Were they going to be permanently placed? Will there be more in the future along the river?
Yeah, so as part of the Rotary Park, basically flipping the park to the other side of the river, we did put a canoe launch in at that location. Those were temporary measures, knowing that access from a canoeing standpoint was going to be limited because of the bridge work. However, we have relocated those. I believe it's to Family Park, so that those are available out there. And I know people love them, and they're not overly expensive, and so I could see us continuing to add more in the future.
Good. And finally, and this is really a big one, we recently got a facility report back, very large document and hundreds of pages, much of which is dedicated to parks because you have so many assets, you have so many buildings, and it's just a staggering amount of things you have to maintain. Is any of that reflected in the capital plan yet, or do you need to digest that, and will that be built into your budget in future years? Because most of those wouldn't be, like just a park building wouldn't be a centralized facility, but you've just got countless things at the golf course, buildings and garages and things that need to be kept up.
Yeah, I really think it's probably more of a hybrid solution. If you notice in our capital plan, we have storage plan for our park shop campus, but yet we also have some other facilities like the maintenance buildings, the golf courses and things like that I know Tom and Sean are working on, the centralized facilities piece of it. So we'll be working with both of those programs to try to make sure that we get the things done that we need to get done as it relates to those buildings.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Erickson?
Just one brief question. Are we utilizing the prison workforce still? I know I mean, everyone's struggling for workforce, and so I just didn't know if that was something that we're still doing, and if we can, enhance that more to have more of that. Obviously, it needs to make sense and be safe, but
Yeah, we love them. We use them like right now, pool shutdown at Midco, acid washing, cleaning up pools, painting pools. That's a great opportunity for us to be able to use them. Our guys just went through additional training, so they know how to pick them up, drop them off, and do all those things associated with using the inmates. And so our guys just love the extra hands, especially on those kinds of jobs that just take a lot of hands. So especially now, this time of the year, especially, we're starting to lose kids back to football programs. They got to go back to colleges. So yeah, we're using them as much as we possibly can.
great, thanks.
Counselor Starr?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for the presentation. Is there a way to make the EAB crisis real for folks? Is there a tour program we could do or something that, even for us, I'd like to see where the damage is, or, I mean, is it visible? It's there, it's going on. It's obviously not something we can drive by because we're hopefully doing a good job that we're not seeing the devastation. Because I go back to the pictures that Mr. Maris showed us. I think it was Minneapolis and St. Paul, and the difference between the two communities. I mean, it looked like a ghost town on the one side where they were the other time. I don't remember which city did the better job of keeping things cleaned up so that trees aren't falling. But again, is there a way to make it real, or the public relations that go with it?
Yeah, we've done some PSAs that we've put out on Facebook. We also have something on CityLink as well, just talking about EAB being real. But we've talked internally about having a public awareness campaign about that, and making sure that you have plans for how you're going to deal with your private property. For example, Sherman Park, right along the softball complex on West 12th, they've got EAB. We found it. We had little red bugs on the guys that were trimming a tree. And so that's how we know it's real. More and more arborists are reporting it as they find it. And so it's spreading. It's just, it's here and there right now, but eventually it will start becoming very apparent. But I do think you're right on point that we do need to do more to educate, and that's why I brought it up tonight as part of our presentation, so that if you get contacts from property owners, be sure to have that conversation if they have ash trees on their private property.
And then, to follow that up, we're cutting thousands of trees, and I was so excited to hear the mayor, as part of his budget presentation when he gave it to the council, talking about the replacement of trees and being as aggressive as we can, because I think it's one of the things that makes not only Sioux Falls but other cities the difference between having a good urban forestry program and the replacement, so that we don't ever see it as a problem, that we've taken care of it. So we want to make sure that we continue to include what we need to replace as we're going along too. So.
Yeah, that's a great comment. What we always talk about internally is that, this is a challenge that creates a great opportunity to really improve our urban forest, because the sad thing is that we had too many ash trees. Should have never got to that point in the first place. Challenge is we never permitted anything, so anybody could plant really whatever they wanted, essentially. And so by permitting, we're going to be able to track the number of trees that we've got planted. Maples are no longer on our list because that's the next thing that's coming. And so by taking those off the list, we can diversify our urban forests. And generally, we're trying not to have more than 5% of any one species out there, so that if something does come through, it's not a 47% hit on our urban forests, it's a 5% hit. So great comments.
Well, I know my neighbors are happy every year when the month long that we have when my cottonwood sheds through the backyard, and probably reminds me I need to probably have cleaned out my brand new air conditioner that I hadn't done at all this season. So, but that is a tree that was a big part of this area. So
Sure.
it does. It started as anyway. The other thing is, are we getting you enough storage? I think that seems to be the concern sometimes, that we don't get you enough storage that you have. I know back from the time we talked about the ice rink and that part of it, of getting enough of the assets under a building, and I'm glad to see that there is some storage, but is it enough yet? And
it's getting there. The other thing we have an opportunity to do is expand our existing location, Pasley, Arrowhead, to be able to just add some square footage to those buildings because we have the space. We don't necessarily need a new complex. We're just going to add some indoor space to be able to accommodate. Because the other thing is, you know, we talked about the seasonal employees. As the system grows, we get more and more employees and they have to have a place to report to work and fill out their time card and do those kinds of things. And there's more weed eaters and all those other things that go along with it, so. But yeah, thanks for your concern, but Sean and his team are doing a good job.
Thank you.
Counselor Selberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you touched on this, but so when we approved that increase early on for more lifeguards and that, so did that fill it up pretty well and they stayed pretty well staffed for the summer? And I think we talked about before, the goal is to, whatever that wage increase was, that will be probably in the new budget. It's not going back and.
Yeah, we didn't, how do I explain it? When we got the wage increase, the number of applications significantly increased. When we got to about the end of June, anybody that wanted or needed a job by that point was kind of employed or not going to be employed at that point. So they really tailed off at that point. Initially, we thought if these applications keep coming in, we won't have a problem getting Frank and McKinnon open, but they just dried up at that point. Not necessarily because of the wage, it's just the timing of such that it was middle of the summer and it was kind of getting too late. But the good news is that we have that young crop of new employees coming in, and then we'll have that base of 30 or 40% that'll come back year after year, and which we didn't have this last year. And so that was compounding effect of not being able to fill the ranks this year.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You bet.
Other questions, counselors? I just have one. I know you and I have had some correspondence about Harmondon Park, and I'd just give you the floor to talk about what we're doing out at Harmondon Park.
Yeah, so at Harmondon, we've been doing a variety of different projects out there. In the last few years, we replaced all the internal trails out at Harmondon. Those are original trails that got put in as part of the complex development on the baseball side. And so we replaced those all with concrete trails. We also have been doing some netting. We have some foul ball concerns about early in the evening when the sun's going down, the third base, guys on third base can't see the ball coming at them. And so we added some additional shade structures on the backside of some backstops. We also this fall are doing some infield renovations on field 7 that will make it a regulation field, but also core out the infield as a kind of an experimental drainage project that will allow us to see if that works. And if it works, then we hope to be able to expand that to the other fields out there because of the high clay content of the soils out there, as well as the minimal drainage that was put on those fields initially when they were constructed. And then at some point, we hope to be able to have an artificial turf field out there as well. Field 1, 2, and 3, those fields up top would be great to have artificial turf. Almost all these communities around us are going to that. Brandon's got it, Augie's got it, a lot of these small towns have them. And it really just extends your ability to play through weather, especially early in the season when, you know, potentially snow on the ground yet. Other areas that have turf can blow that off and still play. When you have the natural turf like we do, it's a challenge. So certainly we're hoping to find a public-private partnership there. I've been talking to SEBA about potentially doing that, where we can expand some of those things. And then there's also some shade structures, some other various fan amenities that we've talked about doing out there. But we've got over $1 million planned in the 5-year capital plan for improvements out at Harmondon. But the ones that we really could use some private support from are those artificial turf fields on the baseball side to reduce the number of rainouts that we get out there and really try to enhance our ability to weather the storm, so to speak.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much for
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank
If
you.
there's any questions, we'll have them follow up.
All right.
Thank you. Next up, Planning and Development Services. I've been promised that this will be the most dynamic presentation that we're gonna have. And you're chasing some people out right now.
Hope we're adding some.
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman Sale, councilors. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you. Jeff Eckhoff, Planning and Development Services, and we'll try to be as exciting as we can be. So If I see you nodding off, I'll just throw something at you. First, I'd like to acknowledge my team, my management team, Matt Tobias, who's the manager of the redevelopment, housing neighborhood redevelopment is here, as well as Rich Warrington, our chief building official. Certainly want to formally introduce to you Kevin Smith, who is our new Assistant Director of Planning and Development Services. Many of you know Kevin from his service to the city prior to being with AE2S for the last 6 years. And just thrilled beyond belief to have him on board and have him helping get this big city moving forward. He will be focusing on the day-to-day operations as well as housing will be a priority for him. And before we get started, I'd really be remiss if I didn't thank the finance team, particularly Amber Gibson and Tim Conda, who are our two primary analysts who just really do the yeoman's work to put this budget together, work with us throughout the year to keep the budget on track. And so just really a big shout out to them and thanks and for Sean and his team. To start out the presentation, just we need to talk a little bit about growth and kind of where we are this year and where we were last year. As you know, last year we set a record building permit total of $919 million. Prior to that, in 2018, the record had been 786, and we'd kind of been in that 750, 780 range for about 3 years. Last year, of course, we had COVID. It was a year that was really upside down in a lot of respects. Started off strong, and then it just stalled for 3 months, and all of a sudden residential came in. A typical mix, as we are seeing this year, is about 2/3 commercial and about 1/3 residential based on valuations and remembering apartments as part of commercial. At one point last year, kind of in that peak COVID time, it was almost 50% each because people were putting on decks and finishing basements and doing those things while they were at home. And then at the end of the year, we had that $200 million plus permit from Amazon that pushed us way over the top. So it was kind of an oddity, again, a very strangely constructed year. The difference this year is we are now at the end of July, as you can see, we're at $607 million, which is $200 and some million ahead of where we normally are this time of year. If you look at past years, we're about 52% ahead total. The thing that's really different about this year is the balance in the permits that are coming in. We have 10 permits that are $10 million and over. Our top permit's about $27 million for the distribution center out in Foundation Park. So we have 6 permits at $20 million and above. We have 4 permits at $10 million above, and the rest all fall below that. So it's more evenly distributed. It's not tied up in one big project. And we do not have the Steel District or the Sharapa Place permits in this total yet. So just to give you some perspective. We're ahead of where we were. If you look at our 3-year average, we're about 38% ahead on our residential, which is about 62 million, and we're 104%, 195 million ahead on commercial, where we typically are. Now, of that 195, 100 million of that is apartments. Just to give you some perspective, we had total last year we permitted 1,571 apartments. As of today, I checked this morning, we've permitted just about 1,400 this year already, or $160 million worth. We had the housing meeting with the legislature last week, and getting ready for that, I was talking to Jake Kwasny from Lloyd, and they have about 5,400 units. Actually, this was with Luke Jessen. They have about 5,400 units in town. So I said, Luke, what's your occupancy rate? He's like 99-point-some% leased. He said, put it another way. I think this was last Monday. If somebody came to town looking for an apartment from them, they had 14 available out of 5,400. So the need is obviously there, driving this type of demand that's going on right now. Population-wise, you heard Director Pritchett mention last week that we have grown about the size of two Brookings in the last 10 years. Our growth has been just under 42,000 people in that time frame. Interestingly enough, I was looking back at some of the Shape Places projections, and they are projected, if you look at that, and we'll readjust that with the census, and we are typically conservative with that, but we had projected then a similar growth of about 42,000 people from 2020 to 2030, which probably is underestimated. And we were estimating a growth of another 52,000 people from 2030 to 2040. And so in the next 20 years, we're looking at adding at least another 100,000 people, and that's probably light on the estimates, just to give you some scale of where we are in the growth, both in building and in population, which of course are connected. Very quickly, just running through our office and our organization, we have different divisions and different tasks we do with the fall under planning, building services, and then we have transit, which you'll hear about when I am done. Sam Chabelcock will come up and talk to you about transit, and then next week we'll be back to talk to you about housing. But just in general, we have planning divided into future planning, which is land growth, our transportation plans for pedestrian, bicycles, vehicles, comprehensive downtown plan. We have about 3.5 FTEs to work towards that. We have current planning, which are the ones you're most familiar with, or just what we call the Jason and Albert show. Zoning, annexation, subdivision plans, that type of thing. We have about 8.5 FTEs in that, which are urban planners and plans and zoning specialists that do the reviews on the zoning compliance. Building services is our largest department and our most front-facing. It's permit techs, plans examiners, and our inspectors. That's about 30 people. Community development, we have Dustin, who does our TIFs, our bids, discretionary formulas, and then our newly created neighborhood revitalization with housing, code compliance, property maintenance, our neighborhood associations, historic preservation, and arts. That's about 13 people. And then we have transit, which is a shared position, Sam, who is also our future planning, who oversees that, and we'll be requesting a position for that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Talk about how we connect people with our community. Just talk a little bit about our commitment to service and the services we provide. And this really is a reflection of what I would call our most public-facing or front-facing part of our division, which is building services. Coming in to get a building permit, getting inspections in your home, and that type of thing. We shoot for a high customer satisfaction. We were at over 90% pre-COVID. We had a little kiosk that we kept in the front that got pulled in with COVID, and we just recently put that back out. And we're looking for other ways to engage and try to get feedback on customer service, which of course everybody's doing, and it's tough to get people's attention. So this is kind of a low tech, but it actually does a good job of how people feel about their interactions with us when they do come to City Hall, or to City Center, pardon me. As you see, we do over 7,000 permits a year. We do 60-some thousand inspections. About half of those are building, and another half are electrical, and then they're spread out beyond that. COVID was an interesting time for us. We were fortunate that we had our online services. We were able to remain open. We talked to other jurisdictions that were still totally paper plans, didn't know how to get started and how to operate through that. One of the great things that happened is that people continue to use our online services. You can see the increases in inspection requests. Permit applications are up 60% as people have learned to be the convenience of going online to submit building plans and submit requests for permits and for inspections. The other thing that happened was we learned about to do virtual inspections, and we had talked about it for a long time, but COVID kind of makes you do these types of things. And so the most frequent uses in our mechanical with water heaters, air conditioners, furnaces, underground electrical, and small corrections. So what typically could happen is, Kurt could have a new water heater. So the contractor calls Kurt, says, I'll be out on this day to install it. And we'll call Kurt and say, yeah, we'll be out this day, and we'll come and inspect it. Oh, there's a correction. Well, now the company calls you back. Kurt, can you be home this day? So we come make the correction, and we call him again. And we set up. So it'd be 4 times Kurt had to stay home to wait for us to come there. Now what happens is the contractor gives us a call, says, hey, I'm done. Can you do a virtual inspection? Somebody will get on their iPad or their phone. They'll look at the inspection. Yep, it passes, or no, there's a correction. The guy will say, okay, I'll call you back in 10 minutes. And so then he'll go ahead and do a second virtual inspection, and we're done. And we've done it in one trip, and Kurt only has to stay home one time and let us in the house to get all that done. We found that to be an incredible time saver. We're trying to track better, but we feel that we did about 2,000 of them since the first of the year through July, which is about 10% of the overall for the MEP part of it, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. about 20 to 30 minutes per inspection, time saved. We feel that saved us about almost half of an FTE this year. Now spread out against those three trades, but certainly it allows us to move forward with without increasing staffing, and allows us to manage that time much better. The more we use it, the more our staff likes it, the more it's out there, the more the contractors are liking it too. Obviously, it saves them time as well. We're in the process of code adoption, as you know. We are looking at our building mechanical. We're waiting on the state boards for electrical and plumbing. One of the things that Butch and I have talked about is trying to do a flow chart, or trying to do a list of things, checklist, so you can see when we come to you for approval, the codes that we can't change, the codes we have changed, and the things that we've made allowances for, particularly in the light of the conversations we've had about housing and the cost of housing. So obviously life safety is important. Obviously having an efficient home people can afford is important, but we also want to be as practical as we can, particularly in the housing situation that we're in. Looking down the road more closely at our budget, we do have a budget of $12.7 million, of 3.4 of that roughly passes through in the bid and down in lodging taxes. Our revenues are estimated to be up about 5% next year based on actual trends from growth. Our expenses about 4.8%. The majority of that is cost of living and step raises for staff, and the addition of our request for a commercial plans examiner. As you look at how we scale for growth and how we try to prepare for the future, our request in this division is for another commercial plans examiner. We have 3 right now, full-time on commercial. We did a lean office exercise a couple years ago and added a residential plans examiner because that's where we found our bottleneck was. And if we kind of can run at that 12 to 15 plans or so in the queue, we can get them turned around pretty much in 2 weeks. You can get your building permit. Pretty much since last fall, we've been running at 25 to 30 all the time, just constantly. Hasn't been much of a break. So just a few hours ago, I asked Butch where we were today. Today we have 45 in the queue. 27 that are under review, another 18 that are pending. As soon as they pay the review fee, that'll go into the queue. Some footings and foundations, and then some of them are being triaged. What we try to do is look at them and see if they're complete, so they don't sit there incomplete, and then all of a sudden 3 weeks later go, oh, by the way, Kurt, we don't have structural plans. So we try to do that up front. So all told, there's 45 plans that 3 people are working through. So obviously you've heard about it in the community. We've talked about it, the backup time. So that's a position that we're really excited and really need that position going forward. So if we're successful and this is funded, as soon as this budget cycle is approved and we're formally in place, we do have the funds. We plan to go ahead and advertise and announce and hire as soon as we can in that position. We're also looking for a transit program coordinator. Sam will talk about this a little bit more, but we had a triennial review here a while back. The feds, as you've heard in lots of different arenas, are asking for more and more oversight and more push on compliance. And we have, between CARES and ARPA, we're looking at about $10 million of transit funds that came in over the last year and a half, and we know we'll get more funds under the infrastructure bill for transit. So the compliance that, the importance of the pilot program, the on-demand program, to be able to meet the future needs of what is a declining ridership across the nation, as well as is in Sioux Falls, even though it is starting to come back. We feel the need for another transit planner, but more importantly, what that will do is free Sam up to do some of the long-term, long-range planning types of activities that we need him to do, as well as direct his division. And then we have, of course, we added the assistant director position, but we converted the housing manager FTE, so that's not a new FTE. And but as I mentioned, Kevin will focus on the day-to-day operations. We too, as Don mentioned, we're looking forward to working with Director Pritchard on his centralized facilities fund. I think the coordination of where of all the departments, where parks go, where fire stations go, where libraries go, makes a lot of sense. We've always done that informally, but to bring that together and kind of drive that through that fund, we're excited about how that prospect moving forward. And again, we continue to grow at a rapid pace, and that orderly growth needs for us to be ahead of it. It needs to us to be planning along with Public Works and Parks and everybody else on our infrastructure so people know where we're going. We talk about investing in today for a better tomorrow. We are looking at increasing our support to Forward Sioux Falls. That comes through our budget from $400,000 a year to $500,000 a year. We have obviously seen great success from the Development Foundation Chamber of Forward Sioux Falls campaign, and so that is our proposed commitment to them. And then our other big increase would be we're adding $88,000 to our budget for the maintenance of art. We have almost 70 art pieces throughout the community, and they need some attention. We have a consultant come every year that does minor maintenance, does an inventory, gives us a report, and does minor maintenance and cleaning. But there are pieces that have deeper needs, and we do a lot of that work through Quality Welding, who does a lot of the mounting for Sculpture Walk downtown, and then Bronze Age in town also works with us a lot on the bronze pieces. So we have good local vendors we can work with, but we just need some funds to start maintaining those pieces and keeping them from deteriorating. And we have a couple pieces that they're certainly not in danger of falling over, but if not done, something done within the next few years, that could happen, and we certainly don't want that to happen. So, in closing, we certainly don't do what we do alone by any means. We have an incredible team, but we also have great partnerships with the economic development world, if you will, and those moving workforce development forward with downtown Sioux Falls, Forward Sioux Falls, CCOG, Development Foundation, STI, and the Discovery District. Most of those organizations, with the exception of CCOG, because they have a inflationary based on CPI index in their funding, have been flat funded for several years. So we're looking at a 2.5% inflationary cost to add it on to those other organizations, and of course Forward Sioux Falls is the flat $100,000 increase from past years. All total, those partnerships are about $1.8 million, and that flows through our contractual services part of our budget as well. With that, I will be standing open for questions. I thank you again for your support through the years, support on not only financing, but your support on the zoning and the growth and the many, many plans and rezonings you see come before you. And again, open for questions and have additional staff here if you have specific questions for them.
Thank you. Councilors, questions? Councilor Jensen.
So for the Forward Sioux Falls increase, so that's $500,000 a year. So for it's a 5-year program, is that right?
2.5.
2.5. Okay. So we got to be one of the larger contributors, investors to their organization. It's a great investment, and they've gotten a lot of successes out of that. So I hope that others in the community see that, and the city is really stepping up to do economic development in Sioux Falls.
Yes, thank you. Good point.
Other councilors? Well, seeing none, I think you've done a great job keeping us informed and up to date. That's probably why there's not a lot of questions. I would like to compliment the fact that we've had all these good things going on in the last few years. You know, Schropp Place, the steel development, now we've got Amazon. So I'm going to give you this opportunity to let us in on the next big thing. Is there something coming that's going to exceed or equal the past excitement we've had? And you don't have to, you can be as specific as you want.
I think right now, pretty much what is known, what's out there coming off. So we have Holstone Foods looking, and we've got the big distribution center up in Foundation Park that's being built right now. But no, there's not anything right now. It'd be nice to catch our breath for a year, actually. But you know, we continue to look at housing efforts. We do have some interest coming, I guess, now that I stop think about it. We have some interest coming in some of the rail yard, the rest of the rail yard redevelopment. And of course, there's always additional prospects Bob Munn always talks about out in Foundation Park, but I'm not aware of any others right now that he's willing to share.
Well, thank you. I look forward to when you can share that with us at that point. Thank you very much for your
Thank you all.
presentation. Move on, transit.
Good afternoon, Sam Trebilcock, City of Sioux Falls Planning and Development. I'm going to talk to you about transit budget for 2022. I'm going to hit the high points and certainly want to entertain any of your questions too. So, major impacts, I think more than anything, as you probably could tell from the budget book, is a $16.9 million overall budget. So I'll try to break those things down into some of those major impacts, the changes. More than anything, Jeff had talked earlier about a request that we have for a transit program coordinator. Again, with that, if you might remember, 10 years ago, there was a transit planner, a full-time transit planner. There was things that were moved around at the time, that was moved around into planning, and I became more involved with it. During those last 10 years, as you might know, there's been more and more things going on in transit. And as Jeff also talked about, more and more needs to do oversight of our contractor, which is Sioux Area Metro. And that's something that the federal government requires that we do as part of their triennial review, which is done every 3 years and was done just recently here. And this certainly reminded us the importance of doing some of that important grant administration, federal requirement oversight, things that we need to do. Overall, the triennial went very well, but there were things that to keep up with, we think it's important to look at that. So that's what that request is. And as Jeff was talking about, again, there's more things going on with the SAM on Demand pilot project and other projects we're working on in areas of paratransit and things like that. We think that's really important to keep up with that. The other things that we talked about investing in today for a better tomorrow. Again, SAM on Demand is going to be a big thing, and I'm going to talk about that over this next year. You just updated or did an approval of the pilot project going into next year. That'll continue into next budget year. I'll talk about that a little bit, what we're going to do, and we talked about that earlier, maybe a couple months ago, so I'll save that to the end. But in terms of the big project items, the transit headquarters remodel, that's at 6th and Weber. Dire need of an update. If you haven't been over there and you'd like to take a look at it, it certainly has needs for updates. In fact, give you an example, I was just over there a couple weeks ago for a staff meeting, and it was one of the 100-degree days that we had. I walked into the building and sat down and went, uh-oh, where's the air conditioning? They had no air conditioning. So they have a multitude of different issues that are going on to the point where they've had to bring in portable air conditioning units over there. That's not something that can be sustained for very long. We know that there's issues like this, plus other, they don't have enough room over there, they don't have adequate ADA facilities, they don't have adequate meeting facilities. So this is, we really feel is an important need. And so in the budget, there's a $3.9 million item for that. Now, much of that, if not all of it, could be funded very easily by the American Recovery Act money that we received this past year. That's about a $4 million budget grant in itself. Fixed route buses, as usual, whether it's paratransit buses or fixed route buses, we typically, from one year to the other, are updating. And next year in 2022, the same thing. We're looking at 5 additional fixed route buses, not additional, replacement fixed route buses. Each one of those is in that $450,000 a piece. That's just to maintain our current service levels. And obviously they need to be replaced from time to time. It's about every 12, 13 years that they need to be replaced. Also our bus shelters that you see around town, and people from time to time are looking for new bus shelters. But our existing bus shelters are becoming worn being harder to clean. So we know it's important for us to look at starting to replace those bus shelters. We're going to look at probably a new design, maybe not something exactly like this, maybe something that's easier to maintain. But we think that's an important item too. Now, in terms of our fleet, I just kind of wanted to show what our fleet looks like right now. We have our paratransit buses on the right that you see from, and here's our fixed route buses. We either have the 30 or 35-foot buses. That's a new bus wrap, by the way, that just went on the other day. And then we also have this new vehicle that we've started. We just purchased about, I think it was 5 of them. And this is in our paratransit fleet. But it looks really nice and it works, so far it's been working really well. You might see them around town, but we think there's some possibilities for this kind of vehicle. Paratransit, and maybe there's some opportunities on demand also as we start to look at what we need in our fleet. And that's going to be a really important item as we work on our pilot project and work with our paratransit, is what kinds of vehicles do we need moving forward? Now you see this every year, and every year it changes a little bit. So this year it's our transit fund, but it really is a snapshot in time because it does change every year depending on the circumstances. And what's changed mostly this past, and that was the infusion of funding that we received from the federal government for COVID, and that was the CARES Act funding and the American Recovery Act funding. So the major difference here is the point in time at which we're forecasting the transit fund to go into the red. Now, just as a matter of a couple of years ago, this fund was projected in 2023 to be in the red, which was a big part of the reason we've been looking at different ways of doing things with SAM on demand and paratransit and all the different ways, because it wasn't sustainable. Well, certainly that infusion of cash has given us a little extra time to take a look at how to do this. And then right now we're looking out to about 2029. The same thing this snapshot also does of the transit fund is to give you an indication of when we're actually purchasing vehicles, or paratransit, fixed route vehicles. You can see out by 2030, there's 20 fixed route buses that we'll need to purchase, and by 2030, there's 21 paratransit buses that need to be purchased just to maintain our current service level. And that's included in this forecast. So I think it's important to go back before COVID a little bit to show where we were going, what our trend was. Again, ridership, fixed route ridership. Our concern has been all along, just as it has been across the country, that fixed route ridership has been going down, kind of in a slow trend. Again, another reason that we need to look at doing business differently. Paratransit, we've always tried to make these numbers come down. Actually, in large respects, it's about the same. We're just moving them in different ways, and that's through River Cities Transit, where the agencies are contracting directly with River Cities. And then the funding comes through the city to do that, and that's in this budget again. There's just a small increase again to kind of maintain that same service level so that we can keep paratransit down and so that we can provide you that van. That van, in large part, we are able to provide because of the agency rides going to CCTS River City. We wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. We'd otherwise have to buy all larger buses. Now we'll talk about COVID and what's going on 2020 and now in the first half of 2021. What we've been doing, you could see in March it went down, of course, in 2020. and then it slowly started to come back up. Where we're at now is we're about at half of what we were on ridership. We're back up to half of ridership. So we're slowly starting to come back. We're at about 38,000 in June, where I guess we're maybe a little over half then. So we're seeing some of this coming back, but we again know there's a lot of work to be done there and a lot of things we need to be looking at in terms of doing business differently. And the ways that we're continuing to look at that, as I talked to you a couple months ago about, and that's SAM on demand, at least that's one of the areas. Our pilot project continues. We've been having some really good luck with bringing those fixed routes in that were completely brought in by the data that we collected with SAM on demand. We were able at this point, just recently, if you've seen, to expand our service area to the entire service area, to the weekday service area, to routes 8 and 19, which I think was a really big win for the SAM on demand, and still provide the services and do it with the same number of vehicles we were doing it on Saturdays before. The other things that we're looking at now is how we can integrate the SAM on demand with paratransit, and then also to start integrating it into our weekday service. And those are things that we'll be doing over the coming year. So with that, I would take any of your questions.
Questions, councilors? Councilor Starr?
I'll start. With the transit headquarters, if we built it today, would we put it on Weber again?
Well, I don't know if that would be the case. I think there's other locations that are possible that might work just as well. And because of the location, maybe there's some opportunities there at 6th and Weber. The thing we have to think about is wherever the location of that facility is, it should be fairly close to the depot still. Because you don't want what I would call deadhead. That means an empty bus for very long when, you know, a driver is on the clock. That's just going to end up being a waste of money.
I guess that's my general question. If we're going to invest the $4 million, which is a small part of what it would take to replace that campus or building, is this the time to look at it being the best location? And maybe it's not.
I think it certainly is. I think it's a good question, and I think that's something that is certainly on for discussion.
Okay. With the new schools coming on board, how do you think have you had to adjust for ridership, or are you trying to forecast how adding a new high school and moving, because students aren't moving as much to CTE, and that's different than transit itself, but with some of the boundary changes and things in a new middle school, has that, are we kind of waiting to see what happens, or are we trying to shift a little bit?
So I answer that a couple of different ways. First of all, we are providing service to Jefferson High School. So there'll be a small change to the route on Route 19 where it'll circle back down on the inbound. So that will be serviced and as of, school start. The other thing I would say is some of your questions about changes, and I think that is important. One of the things we need to be looking at is changes to our community, and we need to really, whether it's SAM on demand or fixed route, how we could provide service in a better way. A lot of our routes have been in operation for the better part of a generation. So there's things that we do need to look at there in changes to people's origins and destinations, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you.
Councilors, other questions? Councilor Kiley?
Thank you. Sam, has there been discussion about establishing transportation systems between, I'm thinking two distinctly different areas, maybe areas of town where we know that individuals are going to rely on public transportation to the employment centers of the city to assist. And then also maybe between, for instance, downtown Sioux Falls, where a lot of activities taking place, and in some of the other areas out on the periphery now, such as the Sanford Sports Complex, our own convention center, and the Denny Sanford Premier Center. What discussions, where are we at with that?
So, it's one of the reasons that we're looking at Sam on Demand. And as you might remember, we have a lot of scattered destinations around town that people need to get to. And it makes it really hard in some cases, that for that to work for fixed route. Because you need a lot of volume for fixed route to work. Now, on the other side of it, there are going to be situations where you might have, like you said, a destination that has a lot of volume. Perhaps it is like Foundation Park or something like that, where you need something like fixed route to work. So those are all things that we have on our radar and are discussing and looking at and planning for.
Other questions? Sam, I have a few. Could you talk to me about how the advertising on the buses and the bus stops, how that generates revenue for us?
So we have an advertising contract where the bus wraps, it's a flat rate contract, and then that contractor wraps the buses, looks for opportunities for that to be completed. We looked for other opportunities when it came up. Admittedly, our market wasn't such that we could do much more than what the flat rate contract would allow for, or at least what Surrey Metro, because that is their contract. They do it, we don't do it. On terms of the bus benches, that's a separate contract. Again, Surrey Metro does that. And pretty much what that brings back in is we don't have to pay for the benches, and we don't have to maintain the benches. There's not much other residual profit that comes in from that. But it does give a place for people to sit, and we don't have to provide it.
Well, thank you. I also have a question about electric buses. We're all hearing and reading a lot about electric vehicles and buses being one of them. How far in the future do you see that happening?
We've talked a lot about the electric bus options, and I think over the next 5 years, it's something that we definitely want to look at. I know our Surrey Metro team actually went up to Duluth, Minnesota to look at the electric buses up there and talk to them. They've been talking to other places around the country. I know certainly there's interest on a sustainability aspect, and we want to be a part of that, undoubtedly. But at the same time, you want to make sure you do it in a way that doesn't break the bank. Some of the things that we're hearing so far is that some of the electric buses, you need a greater number of them because they tend to need to be maintained a little bit higher. So we're tracking that. And we don't know the next generation how they're tracking. So we're just kind of tracking what we know. And I think there's definitely potentials with some of the next generations coming up and to the point where we'll look at purchasing a couple in the next 5 years.
Okay, my last question, I'm going to follow up with what Councilor Starr brought up about the remodel and for the transit headquarters and expansion. You know, that's a very large number, and if we commit to that number, you're locked into that for a long period of time. I mean, that building is there for a generation or so. So for my own sake, and I probably for others, and Councilor Starr indicated, I'm going to have to see some more long-term planning for that and why that is the right location. Because if we're going to invest that kind of money, and it's a 20-year lockup of that purchase, I want to make, or expansion, I want to make sure that's going to be the use for that, and there might not be a better use for that property going forward. So I'll probably try and follow up with you and maybe planning to see how that's going to work. Other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ride the bus. Everybody get out and ride the bus. Now, as always, Sean Pritchard is going to talk to us about the entertainment tax.
Good afternoon, council. As you noted, I am here to talk about the entertainment venues. As I was thinking as preparing for this presentation, the statement of absence makes the heart grow fonder kind of comes to mind when we talk about our entertainment venues here in the city of Sioux Falls, particularly over the last 12 to 15 months. When we talk about connecting people with community, which we've been talking a lot about during this budget cycle, I think when you look at the parts of the city that maybe reach the broadest audiences, we think about the libraries, we think about parks and programming, and I think in large part we also think about our entertainment venues, like the Washington Pavilion, as well as the Orpheum Theater, and as well as the Event Center and Convention Center, which do attract a lot of people and provide a lot of value to our residents. We talk a lot about that, preaching to the choir here in terms of workforce development and being able to have these assets available to us to be able to recruit high-quality people, employees, workforce to live and want to stay in our community. And so as we look back, I don't think that I would be the only one to say that I'm maybe tired of looking over my shoulder at the last 15 months of what occurred here. But I think in order for us to look forward in terms of the entertainment complexes, we have to recognize what the last year looked like for them. One that was full of frustration, I think in large part because of the changes that were outside of their control. And even when we as a community were ready to be open for business, we were still subjected to the demands from other areas and jurisdictions. We weren't able to do touring concerts or be able to perform performing arts or Broadway shows. And so while it was full of frustrations, I think it also shows the resilience, adaptability of our partners. And we do have 3 very good partners that work with us here at the city with these entertainment venues, including the Washington Pavilion, including ASM Global, and including Spectra Food Services. And I think we do have Mike Cruson and we have Jim Johnson here representing ASM Global. I believe Darren Smith was going to be here as well, but he might have been prevented from attending here this afternoon. So if you have any questions for them, they'll be available here as well to speak to those. And though looking back, it has been maybe a frustrating year. It did give us an opportunity to make some fairly significant investments in these facilities as we look forward, and hopefully we are starting to see the light of day here and seeing some opportunities as the Pavilion has kind of introduced their performing arts series, and we're starting to see concerts and so forth return to our T. Denny Sanford Event Center. As we look forward in terms of the entertainment tax fund, certainly the first thing that we think about is what is happening with its funding. And I'm showing you here a comparison month over month of 2021 versus 2019. And so, as we've stated in kind of our monthly financial presentations, we can't really compare to 2020 because that was an erratic year for our entertainment tax. But if we look at a normalized year, we can see a little bit more about what's happening. And if you look at this, you're seeing some very positive things happening, particularly over the last several months. So the entertainment tax is recovering. It didn't recover as fast as our general sales tax did, but it is certainly recovering in a robust way here over the last several months. If you're looking at 18% 2-year growth in May, we've had 14% 2-year growth in July. We haven't issued our financial statements yet, but that is the returns for our sales taxes. So we've seen some really positive activity going there. As far as our budget for 2021, we are forecasting that we will be at least where we were at the end of 2019. That puts us at about a 15% increase over what we experienced for 2020. So I think that's fairly conservative. We continue to not have too many more interruptions. I think we will end with a fairly strong year with the entertainment tax overall. And like we did for the sales taxes, though, as we look forward, we have kept our model at a fairly conservative 4% increase in the entertainment taxes for 2022 and beyond. We'll talk a little bit a moment about some of our kind of modeling here as we look forward and some of the needs for the various projects that we're doing. If we look at what we have done over the last year, we did take these opportunities with these event venues either closed or under reduced capacity or reduced utilization to make some investments into these facilities. And so as we look in the convention center, I think there was 2 areas that we specifically worked hard to address, and I give the team at ASM Global as well as our purchasing team and Scott Rust in particular, who partners with them. There's been a lot of focus on the exhibit hall renovation, so that included both LED lighting upgrades, acoustical panel upgrades, and floor boxes. So really tried to make an effort to refresh that facility, make it really so that it's attractive when the business comes back. We have seen that happening here over the last several months, as well as the vestibule and renovation, dealing with replacement of doors and so forth there. The event center, the major projects there have been the floor joint expansion project, which was taken care of and replaced. The hockey dasher boards were all replaced, and they're working on the finalization. I think they have that all finalized and done. We've worked on front-end video control systems for the event center, as well as for the video boards. And those are the important control monitors that handle the full systems, which were all replaced at fairly significant expense, but keeps us on the top end and the front end of that kind of technical aspects for the facility. And the Orpheum, some basic replacements here at the beginning here. We did a boiler replacement. We talked about it in the budget last year, and we also did carpet replacement for that facility. And I'll talk a little bit more about some more comprehensive enhancements we're going to be talking about for that facility, especially as its utilization has increased over the last year or so. And then at the pavilion, the major changes we had there was the front entrance and retaining wall replacement projects. We did the new ag exhibit that was in the Science Center. They are in the process of implementing a new ticketing system, which will take them into a much better position to be able to really have an enhanced ticketing experience that people actually expect us to have. And so this really makes a major upgrade for them, as well as the staging and lighting control system improvements that they're making in the main theaters. So with some fairly significant upheaval we experienced in 2020, some of the highlights we certainly had was being able to host one of the first indoor professional sporting events that was hosted during the pandemic, which was the PBR Tour, as well as the Washington Pavilion implementing a variety of festivals, but had a very successful Sidewalk Arts Festival last year. Their inaugural Christmas tree, which we saw here, which was very popular, and several winter carnival programming events that they did. As we do look into the next several years, here is just a kind of a glimpse into some of the major items that we'll be investing in terms of capital, as well as repair and maintenance at each of these facilities. The cornice and parapet is something we've been talking about for quite some time. That design is underway. We do anticipate potentially bidding that project in the fall of this year. And so before that is bid, we will be bringing forward that design and cost estimates to you for some decisions to be made in terms of the size and scope of that project. But we'll also be talking this evening about some additional funding that is necessary to support that, given where our entertainment tax fund is because of the pandemic and some of the losses that occurred relative to that. So that will be certainly the most significant project that we see there. The other areas that they're really looking at as a potential cafe renovation, these have been paused a little bit as they rethink the use and the future of their cafe, at what that might look like and how they'll best capitalize on that going forward. So we're ready to support them as part of that project, but we're still working with them to develop a plan of what that might look like. Other plans they have is there will be major lighting upgrades throughout the facility at the Washington Pavilion in 2023 and beyond as they convert to LED. And then the other thing we'll be doing in 2022 is updating their building maintenance plan. They will be bringing people into being able to look at what the major repair, maintenance, improvement needs are going to be for the facility in the near future or over the next several years. We've done a lot of improvements here, but it just brings a third party in to give some advice as to what is outstanding that needs to be worked on. As far as the Orpheum Theater, we do have some more mechanical system improvements that we need to make, which deals with the cooling system and those upgrades. Probably the most noticeable upgrades we'll be working on, and we're beginning to scope out this year and hopefully be able to go into construction either in 2022 or 2023, will be a refurbishment of the lobby area and the bathrooms in the front of the theater. So they certainly, they look in pretty decent condition, but certainly they need some attention and some resources to kind of bring them up to speed, bring them up to date. We really have a huge opportunity with the Orpheum Theater here over the next several years. I think it's undervalued asset, and I think the pavilion's done a very good job of really refreshing the programming in this facility, but now its proximity to the Steel District, its proximity to Jacobson Plaza, as well as to the Levitt, has really opened up the opportunities for this theater going forward, and I know that the pavilion has really had some creative thoughts, as well as some additional creative programming that they're utilizing for that facility. So I think many people who didn't know what the Orpheum was in this community for many, many years, I think are going to know exactly what it is where it is 5 years from now. So as we look at the event center, some of the major items that we'll be working on here over the next several years will be dealing with building automation system upgrades. So again, dealing with mechanical pieces of that, as well as replacing all of the floor chairs. Anticipated investments in '23 include lighting controls as well as small video replacement projects. We are cognizant that we have more significant replacement projects in the year ahead, so we continue to model those into our entertainment tax, and that includes some of those bigger expenses will be refurbishment of those video boards, particularly the video ribbon, as well as the center hung video boards as well. As far as the convention center goes, we've made some fairly significant investments into that facility over the past several years, so it's going to be a little bit lighter on the R&M and capital side here as we look out. We have some HVAC and generator upgrades in 2022, and we will look at replacing tables and chairs in 2023, but probably less intensive on the capital and R&M side for that facility here over the next several years. And then finally, the big piece, and maybe it's a big unknown piece, that has to do with our baseball stadium and where that will land over the next several years. I think the positive thing that we have here is we have a willing and able partner with us in terms of the new ownership group for the Canaries, who have shown a willingness to invest not only in the team but also in the facility. And I know we'll continue to have ongoing discussions about what the future of that facility might look like, or if we end up rebuilding a facility at that location, or more than likely at another location, as it was proposed by the Event Center Task Force. But we do know that that is several years in the future, even if we started that today, in terms of construction design and financing and fundability. And so we did put another $100,000 into R&M for next year, knowing we have a willing partner to assist. I think some of the areas that we're going to need to address with more immediacy is field conditions. And maybe rather than doing a major field replacement, doing a little bit more Band-Aid fixes in order to improve it. I know the league is very interested in seeing that the Canaries make some improvements there, and they've shown a willingness to share in the cost of that expense, and so that's been huge for us. But we also want to make sure, as you said, Councilor Sale, in regard to the transit facility, that any investments we make are made knowing the timeline of how long those investments might be expected to last, and if we're looking at a different facility in the near future. So that is always top of mind as well. Lastly, I guess I would leave you with is just a bigger 20,000-foot view of our entertainment tax, our entertainment areas, particularly as it relates to the event center. We continue to be working with planning as we kind of gear up and looking at the event center campus and what that looks like in the future. A lot of time was spent a couple of years ago looking at this campus and what the future was, and then just as we were gearing up for a market study and we were about to pull the trigger on moving forward with that, the pandemic hit us. And I guess it was opportune that we hadn't moved forward with it, because what would have been studied would no longer be relevant in today's day and age. And we don't know what the new relevancy or the new reality looks like for the convention center industry. And we're watching that evolve here over the next probably 6 to 18 months. And so as that becomes more normalized, or what we expect will be normalized going forward, that will give us an opportunity to revisit that market study and go back and be able to move forward with that. But we also have to look at the fact that the success of our event center complex is going to be driven in part by our capacity to develop and have a broad vision for what that entire area looks like. Not only in terms of connectivity with the expansion and improvements that are being made at the Sanford Sports Complex, which I think there are some complementary things going on relative to that. But what is the plan for the surrounding area? Because we know density and development of that area will be necessary to ensure the long-term success of the investments we have for that event center complex. And that includes things like the replacement of the clubhouse. Like when we replace that, we want to make sure that we're thinking about the broad vision for that, what that looks like. One of the things we're doing to kind of gear up for that is looking at retooling our Arena Convention and Event Center board. We do have a board that is met, but their role has been somewhat supplanted by the fact that we have professional management now at our convention center. And when that board was originally conceived of, the city was managing it, and we needed to have that kind of independent public interface necessary to provide reflection. But as we go forward, that may not be the role that they need to play. And so we are looking at that particular board and walking through with them what their role looks like in the future, and probably expect them to probably evolve in some way to be an extension of the Event Center Task Force and what that looked like, bringing on really truly experts in their fields of various areas that are going to help us drive this forward. And so we're working with them over the next several months and potentially maybe bringing back some proposed ordinance changes to reflect how we bring them into an area where they're going to be most valued and useful as we move forward. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions you have in regard to our entertainment tax.
Thank you. Questions, counselors? Counselor Neitzer.
My question is probably for the event center staff back there. So my question is as it relates to things like the marquee acts, you're so dependent, of course, on whether or not they're touring. You know, they're not necessarily going to do a one-off. So what are you hearing from the industry, from the promoters? Are they looking at starting to tour again, or were they going to and then Delta came along, the Delta variant, and are they starting to pull back again? How is it going to look maybe in the next 12 months?
Mike Cruson, ASM General Manager. Counselor, the message from the entertainment community is fairly strong. We've had, for the most part, people have not been pulling back. There are a couple of rare instances with some acts that are pushing some of their 22 stuff into 23, but for the most part, everybody is staying the course right now. There haven't been many cancellations. Our schedule in particular is fairly set right now for the rest of this year and into early 2022. It's been a little slow on the calls as far as getting new dates and everything like that, but we still anticipate a very, very strong 2022 as it relates to concerts, as additional family shows, sporting events, those type of things.
Okay, that's good news. How about on the convention side of the table? How is that looking and recovering?
You know, it's bounced back pretty well. This summer has been very strong for us. We've exceeded our highest room rental rate in the history of the convention center this year, which we had a slow start to this year. But we were fortunate, we were able to pick up a number of businesses and events from our surrounding states that were in much worse shape. We picked up wrestling tournaments, volleyball tournaments from Minnesota, Nebraska, etc. Now, what's interesting is some of these functions, it's not so much those, but also just meetings and banquets and stuff like that. They have been very slow to come back as far as their capacities are concerned, okay? So we've been able to get that full room rental because they may have rented X Hall 1 and 2 in the past and filled that up, but now they're still renting those rooms, but they're at half capacity or 75% capacity. So we're still garnering that revenue. However, our food and beverage revenue, because of the less attendance and more people, including, you know, Zoom and Skype and those type of things, we're seeing those numbers decrease. Now we're hopeful that come next year that some of those in-person attendees pick up, which will then increase our food and beverage revenue, et cetera.
Okay, and so you just hit on that with conventions as it relates to how many people are attending. Rolling back to the events, the concerts and things like that, what are you seeing in terms of, you put something out for sale, in terms of, because there's going to be a comfort level, particularly I suppose, of the person that wants to go to the event. And then of course maybe, I don't know if these apply right now, for example, any seating protocols or restrictions that somebody may put in place, like half seating. So how's that looking?
Well, there are none right now. We typically follow city guidelines. So since last June, we have been at 100% capacity. Now, we leave that up to the promoters. So when PBR attended last July, they enacted the protocols. They felt comfortable with about 48% capacity, and then they worked their way up. Hockey was at about 90% capacity. They had some restricted, some spaced out seating in part of their areas. So we don't have any protocols that we're enacting ourselves. We're kind of leaving that up to the promoter or the tenant to set those and then work with them. Now, moving forward, again, some of these concerts that we do have on the books, they have sold very well. So we have next month, we have Luke Combs, you know, Alan Jackson is selling pretty well. So we expect that those should be at somewhat near capacity for those set events. So, and same thing in October. And I think, again, if everything stays the course, that people will go out and buy those tickets and be comfortable. I was at the fair last night. People were packed in to see the concert last night. So I think it's, again, it's a comfort level as long as we don't fall back into too many restrictions as far as limiting capacities, which then also will affect the promoter and their desire that limits their ability to make money. I think we're headed in the right direction.
Will 2022 be on par with 2019?
That is my hope. That
Okay.
is my hope.
Is AC/DC looking at, they lost a member, are they looking at touring? I'm running out of time to see them, so I just want to, before they retire, I mean,
Before
if
they
you could,
retire,
if you could just get them to just do one more tour and come here, that would be wonderful.
we'll make some calls.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, counselors? Counselor Starr?
We'll invite them to come to a curling competition as well and a concert, and so we'll get 2 out of 3 covered out of the 8 of us. Talk a little bit about what ASM's position is about vaccinating employees, requiring vaccinations. We're seeing it in different venues, different groups. What's been the corporate philosophy and policy? And I guess the reason that I think about it, I think about the Minnesota wrestling tournament that came here, and there was quite an outbreak and a spread of COVID. And when those folks went back to their home in Minnesota, they were put on requirements of testing and some of the contact tracing that they needed. But I didn't hear a lot about what we were doing for our employees here in Sioux Falls and the people who attended from a local. So I guess partially I'm blending those two together, but give me an idea, what are you hearing from your corporate folks of requirements? And
Well, for the longest time, as we made our way out of the pandemic to this point, corporate basically still had the policy that we were to wear masks, even though there was no mask mandate in the city, anything like that. And we saw a number of businesses, large box businesses, roll back their requirements for employees. Only until late June did ASM roll back that requirement and basically did something that I've been advocating for several months, was to take each market and case by case, as opposed to taking a huge umbrella for the company standpoint, take it by case, where we saw our numbers almost, it's not even a thing anymore for the most part, where I had the dashboard, the city dashboard up and I could track everything. It's really not a thing anymore. Hospital rates are almost non-existent. So I was advocating for, we need to take a micro approach and say, okay, we have no restrictions, our infection rate is way down, let's release, some of those restrictions, because we got plenty of feedback from consumers, again, with no mask restrictions, but my staff and myself were the only ones wearing face coverings at work. And sometimes that sent the wrong message. So again, fortunately, at the end of June, ASM said, hey, we're gonna take that approach where we're gonna roll that back, but we wanna make sure that we're protecting our employees. So if you're documented that you've been vaccinated, or you certify that by signing a waiver, basically, you can not wear a face covering. And pretty much most of our staff right now have gone through those protocols. so that we don't wear face coverings at this point. And we've rolled back some of our other venue shield protocols as well to be more reactive with what the climate is for the community.
Perfect, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Counselor Erickson?
No questions, but I just want to say thank you to all of those third parties that really run our venues. It's been a tough year for a lot of people in a lot of ways, but especially the entertainment industry has really taken a huge hit. And so being resilient, finding ways to be creative of bringing people in, as well as getting maybe some of the deferred maintenance that we've waited on accomplished as well. I think that's a big deal. So it's kind of a time to reset, refocus, and carry the vision on for what you feel the facility should be in collaboration with the city. So thank you for being resilient. It's been a doozy of a year for so many, but I'm sure you guys are excited to get back and doing what you love to do, and that's putting on shows and events and conventions, because you haven't been able to do that. So I'm sure it's been tough. So thank you for being here and answering those questions. You've always been really responsive anytime I've needed to reach out for whatever reason. So I'm grateful for that. I'm also excited for the new leadership within the baseball field. It just feels different. It just feels exciting. I know that facility needs some TLC, and we'll see how it gets there. But you know, if it's something that's going to be discussed moving, you know, I'd hate to keep investing a ton of money in it if pick on it. So at any rate, I've kind of beat that drum for a long time. I know some of my colleagues have as well, but I really feel confident that they will at least keep the facility clean and up to date, and that's exciting too. So anyways, thank you for your time and being here.
Thank you. Just two things, good things out of COVID. One, we were able to examine everything that we did and try to streamline things and save money. The second thing is we did get a lot of new visitors, like I said, from other states and stuff like that, that will hopefully have enjoyed their time here in Sioux Falls and be able to come back. So try to look at that silver lining. Thanks.
Other questions?
Mr. Chair,
Let me get,
I had questions for Director Pritchett, so that's why I was kind of trying to.
you got questions here? Great. Counselor Knightson?
Just rolling back, ditto to everything Counselor Erickson said. Part-time workers, you must depend on a lot of them. How are you doing with staffing? Did they leave and then not come back, or can you staff your events?
We are currently turning over rocks we lost a number of employees during that time, whether it is operations, part-time operations folks, also ushers, ticket takers, et cetera. It has been a challenge to recruit those folks back and recruit new folks. We will have some struggles when we have some large events, whether it's 10,000 people, which we have next month. But we will do our best. It will be all hands on deck like we normally do, and we will get the job done.
Okay, thanks.
Let's finish up with questions for, anybody else have questions here? I have one.
Councilmember Sale.
Oh, Counselor Brecky.
Thought I'd better ask a question, make everybody know that I'm really here. Its question is for Sean Pritchard, a little bit off of the agenda because it's not supported by entertainment tax, but it is one of the entertainment venues that we're supporting, and that Director Pritchard is on the board. Can you give us just a little bit of an update on how things are going at the State Theater?
Oh, okay. Good. So I serve as an ex officio member on the State Theater Board of Directors, so I'm not a voting member, but I do attend most of their board meetings, and Scott Rust also joins me for each of those meetings as well. And so they have had very positive activity. Overall, they have been beating their budgeted expectations. I don't think anybody expects that it will be a robust income generator, but it has been very positive, and their attendance has been very positive, and they've sold out a lot of shows. And now that they're, I believe, getting to a point where they're not having to do reduced attendance shows any further, it's going well too. So they're been very successful, and I think exceeding their own expectations for where they would be at this point.
Thank you.
Great. Counselor Starr, you've got questions for?
Yes, if I could. One of the things that we include the zoo is at least by ordinance, is included in the entertainment tax fund. We've chosen over the past several budget years to not fund the zoo, that we funded them through the parks and through general fund obligations. Do you see that from the administration's point of view, that we would continue to do that? Or if we chose as a council to add funds for the zoo through the entertainment tax fund, which COVID's really thrown a wrench into the amount of money that's available there, do you see that as a way into the future to fund the zoo, or is it something that it's been the administration's position to not?
I think our goal is, for just simplicity, that we would prioritize it within the general fund and try to keep it as simple as possible so that we're not splitting between, because I think for quite some time, a majority of it was still coming from the Parks and Rec budget and the general fund, and then a small portion was coming supplementary from the entertainment tax. And as of, I believe, last year, we were able to wean ourselves off of that and allow the entertainment tax to become more supportive. And I think that's somewhat in recognition of the growing number of assets and the fact that we're supporting, the event center, which, over time is going to need more repair and maintenance, like all things do as they age. And that our commitment should be, strongly through the general fund. And I know that we continue to have communication with the zoo and communicated even in regard to this year's budget in terms of their operating needs. And I think they were very comfortable with the support they were receiving with the city at this time. And, I think as the new director continues to settle in, they'll have opportunities to think about what the long-term strategy will be for the zoo. But I think they've made great strides over the last year. And I think they've also been supported in part in the last year as a result of various funding opportunities that have been coming through the federal government or the state in terms of grants that they've been able to capitalize on as well.
That makes sense. And I'll continue to make my pitch for a free First Friday at the zoo, or some kind of public event that would be free to the public. When they did the weekend of free passes for the bear exhibit, it was incredible the amount of people, the turnout, and people who bought concessions and bought marketing items, and it was awesome. And I think that that's one of the greatest things that the pavilion does, is continuing their Free First Friday program. I think when we fund an organization as much as we do, the zoo / the pavilion, the event center complex, to continue to have those opportunities for folks who can't afford a full price ticket. My last time I took a group to the zoo cost us about $150 or $60 by the time we were done, just in, I think it's $16 or $17 a person. We ended up with memberships and got passes, and it worked. But I think there's an opportunity there that we need to encourage the zoo to have some kind of free day, whether it's a weekend or however it works best for them, that they can continue. Sell me a cheap T-shirt and overpriced drinks while I'm there for my free pass, like most groups do. But there needs to be something with the zoo that opens it up to the community. The other place is, and I know it's part of our monthly financials, but can you talk overall where we're at with both the entertainment center, profitability from the city side, what it costs us to stay open during the pandemic, and balancing being open versus shutting down? Some of our facilities shut down, some stayed open so that we were ready if something happened. I mean, what did that cost us? Where are we? Just kind of an overall view of how that worked for
What
us.
the impacts were. So if you look at just the event centers, over the course of the first several years, they were able to generate profits, of around $5 million, which they were able to keep in the accounts to support continued growth and thoughts that we could draw on that for some R&M needs in the long-term future as well. In 2020, as a result of the pandemic, I believe gross revenues were down slightly over $9 million. Net losses were slightly less than, I think, $2.5 million, if I recall correctly. And I know we had to come in and actually proportion for that, even though it wasn't, we appropriated for that, even though it didn't need to be paid for from city funds. They were able to utilize their savings that they had generated over time. So you can see the difference there. Obviously, gross revenues are going to be driven by shows, and you're going to reduce expenses, but they did do a great job of really reducing the expenses as much as possible during that time period between utilities and various other things that they did, or reduce services, and we're handling that with their existing employees. We did take a stance, and this was kind of our conversations with them, that we did not want to get in a position where where they were having to lay off wide swaths of their staff. We felt that their time would be better suited to being re-engaged in other parts of the entity, refreshing pieces, and really doing a lot of maintenance and so forth work during that time period. And I think looking back, that's probably, I think, one of the better decisions made at the time. I think one of the challenges we saw with the pools this year, and I think ASM Global and probably the Pavilion as well has seen in terms of hiring part-time staff, is once that pool has disappeared, it's hard to reestablish it. You don't have that pool to draw from again. And so I think some of the decisions that were made by Washington Pavilion for their own operations, and for ASM working with the city for their operations, I think it was the right decision to try to keep as many people on staff as possible through that period. And I think keeping that experience and level of professionalism is going to be key as we go forward.
Thank you. You made the comparison between the two organizations of how they did it and where they're sitting financially, so thank you.
Other things? Counselor Neitzer.
Yeah, maybe my last couple is, and I think you maybe referenced this a little bit, the Events Campus Master Plan. I mean, Counselor Sale was on that task force. I think, COVID obviously dropped a bomb on all of our plans, but do you have any thought of when you get back to discussing the future of the arena?
So I think it's really going to entail, because the future of the arena was really tied to this idea of expanding the convention center. And that requires there to be a normalized market for conventions. And like Mike alluded to, we've made some good progress in terms of continuing to use that facility, but it's been in many ways different than what we normally would have. Like hosting sporting events inside the convention center wasn't always a good opportunity for us because we had booked so many different conventions and things with food and beverage, higher food and beverage that would be associated with it. We have to see that market return. And I think it seemed like it returned fairly quickly, and now it's kind of slowing down with Delta talk. And I think, it's going to be spits and sputters here over the next 6 to 12 months. But we have to see that normalize before we can study anything to know what the expansion of the convention center, whether that's a good investment or not.
Okay, you can't see the future, and obviously this isn't your sole decision, but is the current position that you would envision that they go hand in hand? That if let's say you demo the arena, it's because you're going to expand the convention center? Would you demo the arena and then just have bare ground and think about, I mean, there's a lot of directions you could go. You could add another hotel, you could do nothing. I mean,
I think they kind of do go hand in hand to a certain respect, to the extent of we are getting use out of the arena. It is some expanded floor space, so taking it down without replacing it with anything would be, I would foresee, I'd be a question for Mike, but I think that would be a challenge for them because it has been a complementary use facility and did come in handy even during some of the events that they were hosting here during the pandemic. So it hasn't been a facility we've had to invest a lot of funds in. I mean, it is built like a tank, and aside from maybe some HVAC concerns that we might have with it, and as long as that continues to operate as needed, we haven't put a ton of money into it to keep it operating, but yet it provides a service to us. So I don't think we'd be premature about tearing it down.
yeah. Well, and this may be beyond even my time here, in the time that it takes to think about this. I think it'd be an interesting discussion because there's no doubt that I think the loss of the flat floor space would put a crimp on things that are happening today. I just because of where it's at, I just struggle with adding on to the convention center just because I wish it wasn't there, but I can't pick it up either. But I think that's what any policymaker is going to struggle with. So, yeah, that's about it. Thanks.
Other questions? I've got just a couple. In the budget on page 53, the capital program, $190,000 for tables for the convention center, $300,000 for chairs. $500,000 for tables and chairs?
Scott probably has a better explanation for some of the expense that's related to some of those items. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Pass the buck.
Scott Russ, Purchasing Manager for the city. Yes, there are quite a few tables actually over at the convention center. And it's not just like we're buying one size of table, we're buying multiple sizes of tables for multiple different types of events. And same thing goes for chairs. Different types of chairs for different types of events. Chairs just definitely are not cheap. But one thing you gotta remember though, they don't last a year or two. We get 5, 10, 12 years out of those chairs. So when you look at the expense, it is a large expense up front, but they go for, and they last a long time. So when you look at over the course of the year, over the life of a chair in a year, it's a pretty small expense.
So, Scott, is this a replacement or is this in addition to?
No,
current
this is a replacement. So we reset the chairs, and I think the last time we did it was 10, 12 years ago over there. The chairs we had in there before were original to the building in the convention center. So again, this will be the third time we reset the chairs in that facility, so.
Thank you.
You bet.
And I've got one more question, based on Washington Pavilion. It looks like there's a building needs study gonna be funded in '22. And in 2015, there was a building analysis. Now, this is over 100-year-old building, and we have to do a different building analysis every 7 years? Maybe this is Darren's or Scott's.
Yeah, I was involved in the last one, and again, these buildings, they're a huge mechanical system. And a lot of moving parts and pieces to the building, other than the HVAC systems, the windows, the doors, just the whole envelope of the building. It takes a lot to really put a plan together of when these things need to be replaced. So really, they're gonna be doing a condition assessment of the entire facility to make sure that we have a solid plan going forward so we don't get behind in deferred maintenance. And we put ourselves in a position where we can't afford to replace certain things because we waited too long to replace, large capital assets in the building, such as chillers and generators and air control systems and BAS systems and all those sort of things. So again, they pay for themselves because we don't get behind. They help us build that roadmap for quite a few years out on how to maintain our facilities.
Well, I certainly appreciate the need to have that plan, but if the plan it can't last more than 7 years on a 100-year-old building, we should know how long that window's gonna last.
Right.
I mean, my point is, make sure that this plan can last at least 20 years, not just.
Oh, well, certainly, yeah. Again, you get that information out of this plan where they'll say, hey, here's what you need to plan in the next 5 years, but you should be thinking about these items also. We have that plan, for example, for the Premier Center, where we're out there looking at 15 and 20 years out because of the cost of that facility and the cost of replacing those items in that large facility.
Thank you, Councilor Neitzer.
I thought of one other question, but just on a bit of a aside, you remember the good old days when escalators at the pavilion was a CIP item? Anyway, so, completely apropos of nothing. My question is, and maybe you know this, the convention center building envelope, and I'm not talking about the event center, I'm talking about the convention center. We've put quite a bit of money into that, and I think maybe in one of the projects, maybe we opened it up, and I think there was maybe, I don't remember if it was a roof or what it was, there was maybe more damage or water damage in there than we thought. Have we addressed most of the major building envelope issues, do we think?
The convention center envelope has completely been gone through. The roof, the ephes to drive it, all those items have been addressed. Now we're addressing the doors. I feel really good about that facility where it is as far as the envelope goes. The interior, there's been some fireproofing that's been replaced inside of the building. Obviously done a lot there. Really, the only thing really major left to repair over there, in my opinion, is probably the chillers. Are probably the next thing. We've overhauled the chillers already once. We're probably ready for a replacement this next time, and then probably look at the emergency system in the building too, the standby generator. That's on the docket also, and we'll take a peek at that and see if there's a way if we can get by with either replacing it or maybe keeping the same size unit in there without having to go to a larger unit. Again, we're looking at options.
Okay, so overall, we've really looks good at this point. We've done the major stuff.
Absolutely,
while.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been involved in just about every aspect of the building envelope and in all of the interior projects. We have a pretty new building over there, in my opinion.
Good, okay, thanks.
Any further questions? Thank you. Thank you for all the directors and everybody that's come forward with information. This is the time now we have public comment. Any from the public wish to get up and speak for 5 minutes about anything we talked about? Seeing none, meeting adjourned.